transfer block exemption. But the really good news is that I'm not talking about that. And I'm not talking about that for two reasons. First is because the regulation hardly applies to licensing agreements between university and business. I mean, it may apply, but it's unlikely that any provision in this standard licensing would fall foul of the regulation. So why bother? The second reason why I'm not talking about it is because it's terribly boring. And even though I feel it is my duty to disturb and disrupt the digestion process after the lunch, I think that I have better subjects to do it and to achieve the same results. Today, I will not talk about law, even though I unashamedly belong to the category of such despised category of lawyers. But I will talk about history. And one of the reasons why I talk about history is, I don't know if Amanda is in the audience, is I want to thank the University of Cambridge for having hosted me repeatedly as a student of the summer courses in law, of course, in history. And that helped a lot in building my historical education. Now, let's see if I can make technology work, which is unlikely, but yes, it's succeeded. So, during this presentation, I will argue that the circulation of ideas and know-how is one of, if not the main, lever of riches. There's even a book about this title by, I think, a professor of the Chicago University in economics saying, by the title Lever of Riches, and it refers to technology and the dynamic of technological innovation. I will also argue that to foster innovation and progress, you need to satisfy certain conditions. And the conditions are a certain degree of freedom, and that is because innovators are usually anti-conformist. And a conformistic society is not a fertile ground for innovator. You need a rule of law. I'd like it to be the rule of lawyers, really, but unfortunately the rule of law. And you need a certain degree of respect for the right of property, whether intangible property, such as patents, know-how, or, of course, tangible property. And these conditions are not met. It is very unlikely to create an environment which is favorable for technological innovation and scientific progress. So let's start. Once upon a time, in 1500, the world was very different from now. The world was different from now, but as you can see from this map, Western Europe was not only very small in geographical terms, but was divided and fragmented into very many small states. And the rest of the world was governed by large, big empires. Like China, Ming dynasty was ruling China. The Ottoman house was ruling the Ottoman Empire. And these were much bigger, stronger, more united than was Europe. And if we were looking at it, you would have considered Western Europe as an outsider in the bid for the mastery of the world. Ming China was much bigger, more populated. The Muslim world, and among, in particular, the Ottoman Empire, also the Mughal Empire in India, were richer and probably had more inhabitants. Even Japan was more unified and was, thanks to influence from China, on the way to develop a more technologically advanced society. But all these apparently big empires, for one reason or another, failed in their competition to become technologically advanced. Now, I won't tell you the story of all of them because it would just be to require time too long. I have only 20 minutes. But I will quickly go through a couple of examples and try to explain to you why these empires failed. And I will start from an episode in their life and what happened thereafter to explain and try to provide an explanation for their failure. Now, Admiral Cheng Ho, is anyone familiar with China's history here? They're not Chinese people, otherwise they would know him, of course. Was a very well-known bureaucrat and military leader in Ming China. He oversized and took part actively in a number of oceanic voyages organized by the Chinese fleet between 1405 and 1433. The size of the fleet compared to the expedition by Vasco da Gama was probably 10 times bigger. And as you can see from the image in the slide, the vessel has 4 masts. Now, no European vessel at the time had 4 masts. It simply didn't have the technology to build ships, sail ships, having that size and able to carry the amount of goods or troops that the Chinese vessels were able to carry. During those voyages, the Chinese fleet visited several lands, but they were there on a very specific mission that distinguished them completely from the subsequent missions by the Portuguese, for example. They were not there to invade, to trade, to subdue. They were there to show the mighty of the Chinese Empire, to obtain tributes, and to leave. They were not there to establish a permanent presence. And what happened right after the last expeditions by Admiral Cheng Ho was that China decided to abandon this type of voyages, this type of exploration. There are a number of explanations for it, but certainly one of the most, or the explanation that is considered most persuasive is the presence of an extremely strong and pervasive bureaucracy. Mandarins were, by their nature, like all bureaucrats, extremely conservative, and innovation is an enemy of conservatism. There were suspicions of traders. Traders were looked upon and frowned upon, probably, because they were accumulating wealth, and this was not something that was considered moral by Mandarins. And also, most importantly, and differently from Europe, China was an extremely unified, integrated state. And the control of the state over the country was such that all developments were meant to serve state's purposes. As a consequence, they could easily start, but equally easily stopped. The succession of an emperor, a more conservative emperor, was able to bring to a halt the entire development, and all developments in the country. And this is exactly what happened. In the Hanshin Edict, by which oceanic travelers and voyages were forbidden, brought an halt to any exploration and any subsequent voyage by the Chinese fleet that was left to rot in the shipyards. The Ottoman Empire has a different but similar history. It grew into one of the superpowers. It extended over 2 continents, and at the zenith of its power, it besieged Vienna twice, in 1529 and in 1683. This was the extent of the empire. It went from Persia to Vienna. However, even the Ottoman Empire had a number of disadvantages, and being highly centralized was a disadvantage. It was just despotic. Now, a lot of European states at the time, probably all of them, were, one way or another, despotic as well. But the fragmentation meant that innovators could easily move if they were not desired in one state to the next. This could not be done in the Ottoman Empire. There was severe orthodoxy. And similar to China, and I would say similar to some of the modern countries, an extended pervasive bureaucracy that systematically undermines innovation and prefers conservatism, because the bureaucrats, they don't like changes. They want to perpetuate their status and at the expenses of the rest of the society. And of course, differently from China was in that respect a heaven of tolerance, there was religious obscurantism. An example of such religious obscurantism was the destruction in 1580 of the State Observatory, which was at the time probably the most important in the world, but was destroyed under the accusation of causing a plague. And it functioned for a few years only, and during those few years it achieved some extraordinary results. Nonetheless, the Janissaries, upon instructions from the Sultan, destroyed it. So what happened actually at the end of, during the 16th century, what is called by historians a great divergence. Europe went one way, the rest of the world went another. And the reason is that the circulation of ideas and know-how is, in my view, key to Europe's rise to dominance and hopefully not to its demise. What was the European scene different to what it was seen so far? Well, it was highly fragmented with competing powers, shifting alliances, and repeated failed bids for mastery of the continent. The Habsburg first under Charles V, Spain, Philip II of Spain, France under Louis XIV. They repeatedly attempted to dominate the continent, and all of them failed. All of them failed for various reasons. One of the theories, pretty convincingly elaborated by Professor Paul Kennedy in his book, I think of '89, Rise and Fall of Empires, of what he called imperial overstretch. In fact, they were not powerful enough to control and dominate such a vast territory. And in fact, they simply went bankrupt in the attempt of doing it. Last of them, Napoleon. And also they have found an able opponent in the English, because they always managed to create alliances that compensated for the extraordinary strength of the power of the time. So first against the Spaniards, then against the French. Also, it was a country of religious diversity. Whether this is an advantage or not, it's debatable. I think that in the long term, the religious diversity within Europe helped. But in the short term, it didn't, because of religion wars, the creation of the Inquisition, and intolerance that also Protestants showed. I mean, by the time Giordano Bruno was burnt in the square, in Geneva, Chauvin was doing exactly the same thing. Actually, I believe that religious war and religion delayed the actual Industrial Revolution by about at least a century, if not more. So, let's look at Europe now, in the 15th century. As you can see, it's confirmed what I said about its fragmentation. Except for three main powers, all the rest of Europe is split into several small states. And as I said, that enabled people who were anti-conformists, who had ideas that went against the wishes or the whims of the local ruler, to easily move to next door and find a more welcoming despot maybe, but still welcoming. So this political fragmentation had a number of advantages, because it was, of course, it made Europe safe from single-stroke conquests, such as those that occurred in Aztec Mexico, Sassanid Empire, in Persia, Inca Peru. And also, as I said, and I will repeat once again, it gave freethinkers, undesired innovators, a safe harbor somewhere, somehow. If they were not welcome in a place, they could move to the next. And actually, when it was noticed that their presence was good for the local ruler, then they were invited, and that happened very often, by the next ruler to bring their knowledge and their experience to them. And that happened a lot, if you think about it, in the arms race. Artisans who were specialized in making guns, for example, were regularly invited to move from one place to another to bring their expertise and their knowledge and their know-how in making a more powerful gun. And their experience, of course, was one of the keys to the development of European metallurgy. As an example that I'm bringing here is the printing with the diffusion of books and scientific or empirical content, developments in sailing and creation of modern and more advanced sails. At the time of the Chinese four-mast sails, we only had caravels, but while the Chinese let the ships rot in the arsenals and shipyards, the Europeans developed galleons and then ships of the line, such as the Victory, which you can still visit in London. Also, we innovated the guns. The guns originally were made of bronze because it was safer, but it was also very heavy. But developments in metallurgy that were very much sought after because of fragmentation in the political system of Europe and the constant internal wars led to development of iron guns. Iron guns were lighter, and this led to the creation of field artillery. And field artillery is what finally defeated the Ottomans. Watches. Watches were considered. I mean, if you look at the history of watches, it's amazing. Because the first to create watches were actually the Chinese, the water watches. But apparently they did not pursue this path. In Europe, on the contrary, watches were one of the industry that is at the core of the development in mechanics and precision mechanics. And surprisingly enough, when watches were shown and moved to other countries, I mean, watches of course were known, European watches by the Ottoman rulers and was in China, they were considered a little bit more than toy. And actually, in the Ottoman Empire, for a short time watches were banned because it was considered that watches might replace the call to prayer of a muezzin, and this would have diminished the influence of the muezzin on the population. So, if fragmentation was very important and freedom is very important, I think that as a lawyer I should finally talk about sort of legal subjects and property, and these are property rights. I think that there are two basic questions that you need to answer if you want to explain why respect for property rights are important for innovation. And that applies equally to property rights in respect of tangibles as well as intangibles. Why should I invest in capital and labor to create wealth that can be confiscated, as it happened, for example, in China quite regularly under the rule of a mandarin? Or why should I invest in research and development if a latecomer can rip it off and effectively steal it from me? I need to have not only a law that protects me, but I need to create a society where this law is respected. If there is a law but there is no respect for the law, property rights are only on paper and then they're useless. And this is very likely to undermine the technological innovation process. And within property rights, I think I should mention patents, if not else because I'm a patent lawyer. But I won't promise, I will show you an example later on, but I won't talk too much about that. But the real question is do they promote or undermine innovation? And there are two different theories about it. I will not try to answer it right away, but I will try to bring some example. First of all, the first countries that had a patent system was England. And maybe it's a coincidence, this was also the country where Industrial Revolution took place. James Watt, the inventor of the steam machine, literally said that without patents, the life of the inventor is not convenient. And I think he knew what he was talking about. And also, last but not least, if you're an investor, would you attract to invest in non-patentable invention that is in something that actually does not belong to anyone? You invest money into basically the public, then you should be rather a non-profit organization, I think, rather than an investor. Also Goethe, in writing and complaining about the fact that there was no patent law in Germany, said that the reason why Germany was so, compared to England, was making a comparison with England, also looked so backward, was because the English had a patent system, while Germany did not. But I think that patents may actually also stifle competition. And this may happen if the patent system is abused instead of used. Now, I won't read what's on the slide, and I invite you not to do so, but you can do that at home if you prefer. But it's just to show you an example of an abuse of patent. And like this, there are many, many of them. Now, this is a patent about a sandwich. Now, you may think that it must be very innovative to... it's a granted patent. I mean, it's a patent that went through examination, not in Italy, in the US, and was issued. Basically, it claims what you see here. It claims 2 layers of bread, complainer, because you don't expect sandwich to be liquid, you expect the sandwich to be complainer. 2 layers of bread. Each layer on the inside is spread with peanut butter, and between the 2 layers of peanut butter you have a further ingredient, such for example a strawberry jam or other jellies. And the invention, therefore, he invented a sandwich which, according to the invention, has a peculiarity, is that it is sealed so that the jelly will not leave the sandwich. Now, this patent was granted, and believe it or not, it was enforced in court and was the subject of a private settlement of which I do not know the terms. But the question is, do the grant of patents of this type, and there are many of them, promote innovation, So are we always correctly using this tool? I think we're not. And I think that we in promoting the use of patterns, we should also think about how to best use them. Otherwise, we run the risk of achieving exactly the opposite results of the desired one. Thank you so much for your attention, and if you have any questions, maybe at some time I'll be able to address it.